In 2023, the City Arts Centre premiered a major retrospective by Peter Howson. One of the finest contemporary figure painters in the United Kingdom. The exhibition took over 4 years to arrange, and it included well over 100 of Peter's paintings, drawings and prints, spanning more than 40 years of his career. Victory painting. Peter Howson was born in 1958 in London. At the age of 4, his parents moved to Scotland, where his father got a job at Prestwick Airport. That same year, Peter's grandmother, herself an amateur artist, gave him his first set of oil paints. At first, Peter began to draw and paint battle scenes, action-packed images with lots of people. At school, the young Howson was bullied a lot. This was partly because he had an English accent, but also because he didn't fit in with the things the other boys got up to. He wasn't very academic, but was great at drawing and painting, and ended up spending more and more time in the school's art department. In 1975, when he was 17, Howson was offered a place at Glasgow School of Art. It didn't go well, and on a whim, one day he and a friend walked out of the college and enlisted into the army. It was a terrible mistake. Regimental Bath. In this rather horrific image, Howson portrays the brutality and bullying he experienced while in the army. The artist left Glasgow School of Art to enlist in 1977, immediately regretting his decision after witnessing the physical and psychological cruelty inflicted by soldiers upon their peers. Howson depicts a scene of torture in a dimly lit room. The naked man in the bath is in agony. He's being held down in the bath by 2 fellow soldiers. One soldier has his hands gripped around the victim's neck. The bath is filled with a mixture of excrement, urine, and brasso metal polish. The bath is surrounded by 4 unsympathetic soldiers who watch the terrorising scene but do nothing to stop the abuse. Even worse, the background door is open with an officer walking past, also ignoring what's going on. Heroic Dosser. After 6 terrible months, Peter was eventually able to come to an agreement with the army, and he was let go. He returned to art school, and there became friends with one of his tutors, Sandy Moffat, who encouraged Peter to concentrate on his figure painting. In the 1980s, Howson created a series of paintings portraying a wide variety of Glaswegian characters, such as prostitutes, bodybuilders, and gangsters. He was drawn to the people who lived on the margins of society. whose activities took place often out of sight and in darkness. A dosser is a homeless person or someone who sleeps rough. Howson portrays the man who has no home and no job as both noble and courageous, suggested by his large physical frame and his powerful stance. He holds the railing firmly with his huge hands. He's dressed in a heavy overcoat and the sole of his shoe is coming apart. A tall, ominous building overshadows the man, perhaps implying he bears a great burden. Howson critiques our society's disrespect for someone in such circumstances. He depicts a man who is down, but definitely not out. Sanctuary in Travnik. In 1993, Howson was selected by the Imperial War Museum as Britain's official artist, covering the Bosnian War, which lasted from 1992 to 1995. An estimated 100,000 people were killed in the bitter conflict, and around 2 million people displaced. While honoured by the appointment, nothing could prepare him for the horrors he encountered on his first trip. And he soon fell ill. Upon his return to Scotland, Howson was ridiculed in the media as a coward. Undaunted, he made a second visit to Bosnia, this time better prepared mentally. Howson went on to produce over 300 works of art based on his Bosnian experience. Many of these works are both shocking and controversial, detailing the atrocities taking place at the time and based on victims' accounts. The town of Travnik mostly escaped damage from the conflict. It hosted 30 to 40,000 refugees who fled from the fall of the nearby town of Yaitsa in October 1992 under sniping and shell fire. Howson and fellow Scottish artist Ian McCall assisted with the moving of around 150 Muslim refugees to Travnik. The painting shows the arrival of some of these victims into the safety of the town. The scene shows a photographer jostling in towards the corpse of a child who's been carried away. He shows no respect or restraint around the helpless body. One soldier turns away with sensitivity, while another child reaches across the corpse. The rest of the crowd stare at either the body or at the women, recently arrived and dismounting from the back of a truck. One woman's movement exposes shrapnel scarring on her legs, her face showing embarrassment and shame. Jekyll and Hyde. In 1995, Howson was commissioned to create Jekyll and Hyde by Channel 4 for their show Inside Art. The television broadcast filmed Howson creating the painting from its inception to completion. The painting is a double self-portrait and references the 1886 Gothic novella The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by the Scottish author Robert Louis Stevenson. The novel follows Dr. Jekyll, who invents a potion that allows him to separate his good and evil characteristics, enabling the gentle Dr. Jekyll to transform into his wicked doppelganger, Mr. Hyde. However, Mr. Hyde begins to become increasingly dominant, eventually taking over Dr. Jekyll. The story suggests that righteous and immoral characteristic traits are not of equal quantity, and the evil personalities reveal themselves in more significantly assertive and violent manners. The self-portrait expresses the same struggles within Howson's own personality, although the difference between the identities is less evident. Jekyll, on the left, avoids the gaze of both the viewer and Hyde on his right. Jekyll appears to be introverted, expressing a softness and kindness, coupled with a sense of wariness. By contrast, Hyde is assertive, staring straight at Jekyll and demanding his attention. Howson described himself as a Jekyll and Hyde character. I used to be fine during the day, and then at night I'd get my cloak and hat and go out looking for mischief. Tiger. In 1999, Howson was commissioned by a wildlife group to travel to India. He was accompanied by other artists, including Nicola Hicks and Victoria Crowe. The purpose of the trip was to paint the Bandhavgarh National Park in the central Indian state of Madhya Pradesh. The park is renowned for its substantial population of Royal Bengal tigers. The tiger is alone, out in the open, and he stares directly at us as he stands alert, wary and ready to pounce. He's injured. There are deep red cuts on the side of his rib and leg, and the blood stands out against his golden and black striped fur. Howson paints the tiger with exaggerated muscles, signifying the great strength of the creature, but also the ferocity of the battle. The tiger's eyes glisten, and there's a sense that the fight is not yet over. Perhaps it has only begun. The third step. Howson's Bosnian experience took a heavy toll on his personal life. In the years that followed, his marriage collapsed, and he became increasingly dependent on drugs and alcohol. Having been based in London, he moved back to Glasgow so he could be nearer to his daughter Lucy, and although he continued to paint, his work suffered. The title of this painting, The Third Step, refers to the 12-step programme. a rehabilitation for substance and behavioural addicts that's used by Alcoholics Anonymous, AA. The third step is when the addict accepts the higher power of their God, relinquishing their life and will to devotion. The painting references a time when Howson was staying at Castle Craig for alcohol rehabilitation and had a vision of Jesus Christ in his room. Howson described it was a feeling of absolute incredible love and serenity. The painting shows a naked man crawling through a graveyard. The deep scars on his skin reflect his troubled state of mind. The dark scene is suddenly lit up as a bright ray of sunshine breaks through the gloom. The man is being illuminated by God, feeling the warmth of God's presence and guidance. The light gives him a renewed sense of hope and strength, a sign that he can change the path of his life by accepting and placing his trust in God. Backstreet crucifixion. In 2006, Howson had a solo show at the City Arts Centre, based on the theme of Scotland's patron saint, Andrew. This painting was purchased by the City Arts Centre from that exhibition. It's a study for a larger oil painting, and it transports Christ's crucifixion at the hands of the Romans outside Jerusalem to a contemporary urban backstreet. The brutal scene emerges from the blackness and is harshly lit by a powerful searchlight, reminiscent of a concentration camp. The central figure is being roughly tied to a wooden cross, his torturers showing little mercy as his body is stretched into unnatural contortions. In the foreground, a naked woman offers her breast to the dying figure, as if to torment him even further. Andrew. This delicate work on paper demonstrates Howson's amazing ability to work with a range of different media and on different scales. With just a few lines, he gives us a tender image of the elderly saint. This is the face of someone who's had a tough life. His face is deeply etched with wrinkles, and there's a feeling of weariness in his eyes. Historical accounts tell us that Andrew, one of Jesus' disciples, was crucified like his Lord. Perhaps there is also a sense in this beautiful drawing of an acceptance of what lies ahead. Acheron. Howson is deeply conscious of the great tradition of painting and the relevance of past masters to the contemporary artist and their public. Like his artistic heroes, Howson instills his work with spiritual power. Whether he's portraying the suffering of his subjects or rejoicing in their salvation. Although his work emphasises the emotions of sorrow and anguish, Howson never loses hope in the triumph of the human spirit. The subject for this painting is taken from Greek mythology. It's entitled Acheron, which in Greek legend is one of the 5 rivers in hell over which the dead are ferried. Howson depicts a small boat steered by the mythological boatman, Charon. The boat is already crowded, but around it, in the water, fearful souls desperately try and clamber on board. In Greek mythology, Acheron was known as the river of woe, and anyone who fell in could never escape. The little boat forges ahead, its passengers remaining resolutely intent on reaching their final destination, safe passage to the underworld. Job. This is one of a series of 10 paintings privately commissioned from Howson. Their subjects are taken from the Old and New Testaments of the Bible. This painting originates in the Old Testament book of Job, which begins with a scene in heaven where Satan stands before God. God asks Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job?" Satan accuses Job, an honourable man, of fearing God only because God has prospered him. "Strike everything he has," Satan says, "and he will surely curse you to your face." God grants Satan limited permission to put Job to the test. Why do good people suffer? This is the question raised after Job loses his family, his wealth, and his health. Job's 3 friends come to comfort him and to discuss his crushing series of tragedies. They insist his suffering is punishment for something wrong in his life. Job, though, remains devoted to God and argues that this isn't the case. A 4th man tells Job he needs to humble himself and submit to God's use of trials to purify his life. Finally, Job questions God himself and learns valuable lessons about God's sovereignty. Job is then restored to health and prosperity. Portrait of David Bowie. One of Howson's most shocking paintings from the Bosnian War period, Croatian and Muslim, was bought by musician and actor David Bowie in 1994. They met on various occasions over the next 3 years. Howson recounts, "We were on very friendly terms for a while, and he was an admirer of my work." He continues, "I asked him to pose for me, and we got on very well. I liked him a lot and found him refreshing as a person, and it was a bit of a weird experience because he'd always been a hero of mine." In this pastel, completed in the year Bowie died, the pop star stares straight at the viewer. His face has a haggard appearance, and there are no signs of the showmanship and extravagance which marked his stage performances. Prophecy. This major oil painting, painted over a period of 4 months, was the subject of an hour-long documentary film. It presented a rare, intimate exploration of the creation of a single oil painting. From the bare canvas to finished masterwork. The film then followed its journey through the commercial art world. Across the Atlantic to New York for its first public showing, the sale, and its final destination on the wall of a private art collector in London. Half naked, or dressed in rags, the riotous crowd engage in seemingly mindless acts of violence or gesticulate in despair. At the centre is the crucified figure of Christ, but he too is being subjected to taunts and torture. The painting was inspired in part by the book Dante's Inferno, which tells the story of the poet's journey into hell. With every part of the canvas crammed with figures, this is a very despairing view of the world. Thursday at 8. When the coronavirus was spreading throughout the globe, forcing the world to stop, Howson radically changed his artistic style. As exemplified through a series of drawings he completed during the first lockdown in 2020. Although their content and composition are reminiscent of many of his other paintings, he creates a post-apocalyptic world in which figures including Jesus Christ, Russian President Vladimir Putin, NHS doctors and nurses meet in cramped landscapes full of zombie-like people and ruined buildings. At first glance, there's a playfulness from the use of pastel colours in the drawings. However, upon a closer look, the signs of death are everywhere. Whether it is medical staff exposed to the COVID-19 virus, or lifeless bodies at the margins of the composition, Howson has hidden it in plain sight, just like the virus. Wagner. In one of Peter Howson's latest works, inspired by the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, the artist reflects on the conflict that continues today. The artwork depicts 7 Wagner soldiers, part of the Wagner Group, which is a Russian private military company controlled by President Vladimir Putin. The origins of the current war began when Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine in 2014. And today, Russia is fighting to fully occupy the country. Putin's reasoning for the full-scale invasion was to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine from both internal and external influences. However, the Ukrainian forces have so far succeeded in resisting Russian forces because of their citizens' willingness to fight for their country and their national independence. The artwork depicts an entanglement of 7 Wagner fighters, moments before battle. However, behind all their physical strength and power hides anxiety and fear. They hold wooden torches that provide them with visibility and which double up as weapons. On the right, in the distance, is a small house that has its lights on, glowing in the darkness. Howson reminds us that the conflict is being fought within urban areas and cities, street by street. Howson's work is at times difficult to look at, and he tackles some disturbing subjects. His hope is that by holding up a mirror to the world he sees increasingly dominated by extremism and hate, we might seek refuge, reconciliation, and peace in our lives. The City Art Centre has several Peter Howson works in our collection. For more information about our current exhibitions, visit our website edinburghmuseums.org.uk. For up-to-date news on events and exhibitions, follow us on Facebook at the City Art Centre or on Twitter at EdinCulture.